Hello and welcome to Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thank you for joining us. First tonight, the second debate involving Jim Hood and Tate Reeves. 5 nights after debating here on WJTV 12 News, the two men running for governor took up the issues again, this time in Columbus. They faced topics like mental health, how to keep talented people from leaving the state, and state health care. But the question that was front and center was what each nominee would do with education and teacher pay in the state.
Who's had opportunities to raise teachers' pay. It's too late, Tate. I mean, you know, you've had opportunities to pay for our teachers. You're taking credit for the scores that have gone up. That's because of the hard work of teachers for the past 40 years, and in spite of the cuts that you've made to education.
We have increased funding for public education by $400 million a year over the last 8 years. We've got more work to do. We're going to continue to invest. But the thing is, we can't just talk about inputs. We got to also talk about outcomes. How are our students performing?
Both nominees agree that education and teacher pay are top priorities and that they have plans to raise their salaries to the southeastern average. 12 News' political reporter Gerald Harris was in Columbus and has more.
The debate tonight was heavily focused on education, the brain drain, teacher pay, and funding community colleges. Both candidates see it as an opportunity for voters to vote for them.
He's not for public education, you know, and that is so important for our economic development in our state. Early childhood education all the way through community colleges and our four-year colleges. It is such an important issue. I think the health care issue is another issue that will change course of where we've been. It will make a lot of Republicans cross over and vote for me.
Commitment to education is certainly going to make a difference, but our commitment to not raising taxes on hardworking Mississippians is going to make a difference as well. Jim Hood has proposed $941 million in new spending. To spend $941 million more, he's going to have to raise taxes on hardworking Mississippians.
Another issue that came up was Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves filming portions of his plan for public education at a private school. Reeves said he has been successful in filming a lot of campaign commercials, and he recognizes he did film at the private school. Now, his opponent, Attorney General Jim Hood, says that Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves is running a dishonest campaign funded by wealthy campaign donors. Reporting in Columbus, Gerald Harris, 12 News.
A recent poll of statewide voters looked at several issues: gun control, immigration, and how the state runs its primaries. Here to talk about the results of the Chisholm-Millsaps College poll is Dr. Nathan Schrader, chair of the Department of Government and Politics at Millsaps. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's get to these results here. Talk about gun control. We have an overwhelming support of the gun control. Talk about how that poll and how that's playing out here in Mississippi, a very red state when it comes to the Second Amendment.
Right. So the thing that we found in this poll is that 90% of Mississippians, and this regardless of political party affiliation, support universal background checks, meaning for all firearms purchases in the state. That is an interesting number for a couple of reasons. First of all, like you said, Byron, that Mississippi is viewed as a conservative red state, but this shows that there is something happening in Mississippi that's similar to what's going on in the nation. If you remember several years ago after the Sandy Hook shootings, there was 93 to 94% support nationwide for such a bill in Congress. So the fact that now we fast forward several years later, we've had numerous other high-profile, very deadly public shootings and massacres, and now you see Mississippians, in their opinion, is starting to track on with where the rest of the country has been. So obviously it's hard enough to find 90% of Mississippians that agree on anything, even like what their favorite food is at the state fair. But let alone right here, you see 90% of Mississippians coalescing around a policy issue that again isn't always one that's associated with red state conservatism, but this is starting to cut across party divides.
Yeah, and when we talk about universal background checks, I mean, why do you think that is happening here in such a red state? Because usually a lot of people are concerned about, you know, particularly Democrats want to take their guns away, which they're talking about on the presidential level. Why do you think that is changing a little bit here?
I think the nature of the public shootings and public massacres that we see in the country, thanks to things like social media and these different horrendous stories being broadcast around the nation, and showing up in people's social media feeds and their Twitter and Facebook feeds, there's no escaping it, really, because we see that these things are happening, these shootings are happening in neighborhoods of all kinds, right? They're not just They're not just neighborhoods where Democrats live in. They're communities where Republicans live. They're communities where independents live. That this these incidents are not limited to just one geographic space or one type of community. We're seeing this all over the place, and that's when people I think start to redirect their focus to, wait a minute, this is a serious problem that deserves kind of a bipartisan approach.
Yeah. Also, the crisis that's been heavy.
Yeah.
How is that polling, and what's the issue when it comes to the opioid crisis?
Right. Well, we asked two separate questions because we wanted to get a feeling of whether or not Mississippi voters feel that the opioid crisis is something that they view sort of on a national scope, or they view it as from a Mississippi lens. And what we found is it's both. 92% of our respondents, who are all Mississippi voters, said that this is a very serious issue nationally. Meanwhile, 86% said that about it being a serious issue in the state. So again, our voters in Mississippi aren't just looking at the opioid crisis as something that's happening kind of abstract outside of their daily lives in Mississippi. They see it both as a national problem, and they see it overwhelmingly as well as a problem in the state that they would like to see addressed. When
they say they wanted to address, are they talking about how they want it to be addressed or what needs to happen?
No, but several months ago we asked a poll. We asked a poll question that had something to do with prescription lawsuits over prescription drugs and things of that nature that have been proven in other states to lead to opioid abuse. But we did not. We wanted to just gauge again, is this a serious problem? Because we're thinking, if this is, and it showed that it certainly is perceived as a serious problem, will that give it time to play out in the race for governor, in the legislative races? Because there are some areas of the state where, depending on where people live, this may be even more prevalent than others. So how will that be addressed by the candidates running in their own neighborhoods and districts?
I got you. Talk about the results of the primary, how the people look at the different options to voting, because that's been a big issue when it comes to voting and how people can vote here in the state of Mississippi.
It has been, and every few months we will pull out a few new questions on voting systems, because we find that many voters, no matter which state they live in, they tend to think that everybody uses a system like theirs, and Mississippi's no different. Well, we asked about the system of voting that's used during primaries in places like Louisiana and California, that's known as either the top two system or the jungle primary system, meaning that all the candidates appear on the ballot together, whether they're running in the, say, Republican and Democratic nominations, whether they're running in the either party race for governor, they all appear on one list, and voters will pick one. The top two move on to the runoff there. It almost does away with specific party primaries. And we found that is very popular in Mississippi. And in fact, it's a 55% support, 23% opposed split. So this is a reform that would be welcome here in Mississippi. And I would suspect that maybe some of that has to do with the fact that Louisiana has been using this now for a few decades. So it's starting to, it's becoming something that Mississippi voters do hear about whenever they hear anything about Louisiana politics, that there's an acceptance of that here. We also found, not in this current survey, but our quarterly survey back in January, widespread support, over 70% for early voting. Mississippi, I believe there are 30 some other states that currently do some form of early voting. We only really allow that for in-person absentee voting, where in these other states, voters have a window. The average tends to be 10 days, but it runs from what I've read as few as 7 and as many as, say, 14. But the average is about 10, where voters can go vote in person at designated places or at their courthouses. And that has proven in some of these other states to increase voter turnout. Mississippians have actually we've seen their support swing that from about 14 points over the course of a year in favor of early voting. I think that's interpreted as voters just want more options, and they want more options to exercise their civic duty. So they can do that through the early voting process, because that means they're not restricted just to go vote on one election day.
Yeah, some people are worried about voter fraud when it comes to early voting. What is that? Is there a concern there?
Not so. I've looked at some other existing studies on the early voting states, the states that have had a long experience doing this. From what I've read, the controls are still there in place, right? Because just like you would on election day, you would still need to go through the same process in Mississippi. It wouldn't change or undo our voter ID laws. A voter would still have to go in and present the same credentials or identification that they would if they show up on election day. The difference is their ballots would simply be held as they are right now if you go and vote absentee early at the courthouse and then process the night of the election. So I've not seen some of those security concerns play out in the other states where I've been following what the studies have proven on early voting so far.
How do you think these issues that you polled are going to play out in the election, and what impact might they have on the race for governor and the other down ballot races?
Right. I think there are two different ways that we've been looking at this. There's the impact that it could have on the election cycle, because one of the things we want to make clear to everybody with the Millsaps-Chisholm State of the State survey, we're not doing this so we can try to say, well, whatever the public says is right. That's not necessarily it. We want to give candidates and lawmakers and opinion leaders and journalists just a better insight into exactly what Mississippi voters are thinking. So we're hopeful that maybe this will at least, we're not trying to say that any of these are the right solutions. What we're saying is this should help spark a conversation among lawmakers and elected officials. So hopefully there are some of these issues that candidates running out there see that there is interest among the electorate in talking about things, talking about reforming our voter system, talking about the importance of the opioid crisis as Mississippians perceive it, seeing that there's widespread support for some change in the background check policy. So we hope that it informs those candidates and elected officials. But lastly, we've got a 120-day legislative session coming up in January. So that process doesn't end after the November election. We're hopeful that this data, which is all freely available on millsaps.edu, voters can go look at, or elected officials can go look at all the breakdowns by age, race, where people live in Mississippi by congressional district, their education level. Those are all things that you can compare the results and see, you know, what types of demographics support or oppose which policies. And we just hope that that information is beneficial to better understand what's happening in Mississippi politics.
When you're doing these pollings, does it seem like that more voters, more people, more Mississippians are becoming more engaged in the process?
Well, we hope so. And so that actually could lead into one of the questions we asked about in this poll, was about voter enthusiasm for this coming election. We did not ask about head-to-head election matchups. We wanted to look more at, are voters excited or motivated? We found that 54% of voters say that they're either very excited about this election or they're somewhat excited about it. Here's why I think that's significant. I'm not so sure that that's exactly what we can say is predictive of what turnout will be, but let's say that that is predictive of turnout, 54%. 4 years ago, we only had 39% vote in the gubernatorial elections of 2015. And if we go back 4 more years to 2011, that was about 49%. Even if that 54% translates into turnout, it would be higher than the 39% that we did last time 4 years ago. It was very poor, and the 49% 4 years before that. So I'm hopeful that I'll give you my biased opinion on this is that we need as many Mississippians going out to vote as possible. So I think that the things that are happening, like the debate that was aired on WJTV and on the different public events that the candidates are doing, I hope that all those things feed into a better informed electorate so that they'll go vote and raise those numbers and show that more Mississippians are engaged like you asked about.
All right, thank you, Dr. Nathan Schrader. Thank you very much for joining us. And we'll be right back. Just over 2 weeks from Election Day. It's on Tuesday, November 5th. Polls are open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. In-person absentee voting runs through November 2nd. All absentee ballots must be postmarked by Monday, November 4th. We are your local election headquarters. Well, big news announced this week. In just over a month, you'll be able to start buying lottery tickets in Mississippi. We talked with the Lottery Commission about the details.
Well, it's getting close. We moved the startup date from December 1st to November 25th today. And we're pushing forward to make that date. We've got several retailer applications in-house. We still have more retailer applications coming in. Our sales staff is out in the field. Starting, I believe, next week, they're going to be starting to make deliveries to the approved retailers of things like posters and signage. In about 2 weeks, we'll be notifying, IGT, our vendor, will be notifying them, retailers, to come to training. And so everything's on the move and ready to go for November 25th. I mean, this is a historic moment for the state of Mississippi. It's been a long time coming. A lot of people are calling and asking about it, anticipating where we're going to start. After the first of the year, we're going to start with Powerball and Mega Millions, probably in the first calendar quarter. And then it's on, game on.
Big news in Clinton this week. The ribbon is cut on Continental tires, and soon tires will be rolling off the assembly line. 12 News' Gerald Harris was there for the announcement.
After about $600 million in tax incentives, Continental Tire will begin full production.
When we thought about building our third tire plant in the U.S., we thought about Mississippi, and from day one, really
Phil Bryan says the investment will pay off.
When every one of these individuals, when we reach a full employment 2,500, are going to be paying their taxes, they're going to be able to buy a home, maybe a good automobile, a safe automobile. They'll be able to send their children to college. This is a game changer.
This is a $1.45 billion facility that could expand. The company employs about 250 people, but by 2028, they hope to have 2,500 people working at the plant.
Our strategy is clearly in the market, for the market, so we want to produce locally where we want to sell the product. If you have a long-term philosophy, all of our plants which we have erected are there since, 50, 60 years or even more.
Clinton's mayor say this moment will help put the city on the world stage.
We're becoming a bigger city and a better city because we not only are growing here economically, but with a worldwide reputation.
The area of the plant is about 700 acres, equipped with a training facility.
And we'll be right back. This political season, political signs are everywhere, but one sign in particular is raising eyebrows in Yazoo City. 12 News' Shay O'Connor takes a look.
For about a week now, as drivers enter Yazoo City, they are met with a rather telling sign. A warning for both Democrats and Republicans to leave President Trump alone. The message has since been causing a stir among community members within the small town of about 11,000. Chairman of the Yazoo Democratic Party says he first saw it Sunday evening.
How could you put something like this in Yazoo City? You know, this is African-American community is very disrespectful, very offensive.
The lengthy sign even references the impeachment inquiry currently underway in the U.S. House. Joe Thomas says he thinks the message is a ploy to deter voters 2 weeks before elections. But he says the people of Yazoo City won't be shaken up.
How can we get it down at first? But then I thought about it. You know, we get it down by November 5th. I want to wake up November 6th and thank the Republican Party of Yazoo County for putting that sign because they motivated folks that hadn't been voting in the past to get out and vote. That's our ultimate goal, November 5th, getting Democrats elected in Yazoo County.
But the owner of this sign says he only wants to send out a clear message to the American people.
The sign is not a bias sign whatsoever, and it's not a racial sign. It's got nothing to do with race. It's got to do with our people that we have in office not working for our country and working for the American people.
Tony Kane is from the Yazoo City area. He says he doesn't own this piece of property, but placed the sign here along the highway to call out every Democrat and Republican to come together. And he says he has an ultimate goal.
I would like 10,000, maybe 20,000 signatures on the sign. I would invite black people, white people, Mexican people to come sign it. And if we get enough signatures, we'll roll it up and send it to Washington.
When asked how long he would keep the sign up, he says however long it takes to see change. In Yazoo City, Shay O'Connor, 12 News.
Well, thanks to Dr. Nathan Strader from Millsaps College for joining us. For Gerald Harris and Shay O'Connor, I'm Byron Brown. Remember, if you missed any of Mississippi Insight, you can see it online at WJTV.com. We'll see you back here next Saturday night. Make it a good night, everyone.